get all of them in this conversation. So we have about six questions that the full group panel is going to answer. And then you can go into a breakout room with a specific ED of a specific organization. And those breakout rooms are going to be for about 20 minutes. And we'll let you know when you're 10 minutes in if you want to switch breakout rooms and go talk to another executive director. And for our records, Aviva is going to put you guys into breakout rooms while it's happening. So if you could just rename yourself with the breakout room you want to visit first, Aviva is going to put the directions to do that in the chat. And what else do I want to say? I also want to say why we realize us answering some of your questions is the bare minimum we could do. We also want to let you know that this is just the beginning. Like I said, this came from an idea of a racial equity funders group where we are all committed to action and working together. So that answered a lot of questions. Someone asked if we were working together and if we care about racial equity. And the answer to both of those questions is yes. Everyone you hear from today cares about racial equity and is committed to working with the other people in this room and the other people who might not be in this room, but do want to work with foundations together. So we're going to start. Is everyone feeling good, feeling loose, feeling light, ready to hear some answers to some questions? As my mom say, you got your wiggles out. So I thought we would start with each of the panelists answering sort of a state of the union. So we're going to give each panelist 5 minutes to say, who are you? How long have you been with your organization? What is your mission statement? What do you fund? And do you have an explicit anti-racist agenda? And have you shifted during COVID and the uprisings? So that is sort of our state of the union. So we can all have a foundation knowledge of what these organizations are doing. Does it sound good? I would also like to say, if we were in person, I would tell y'all that I'm Southern and you have to talk back at me. But since we're not in person, you have to give me lots of head nods, some like shimmy, yes, hands. You can raise the roof. I'm trying to bring that back. And I also want you to know, because we couldn't answer all your questions, we are going to read them and we're going to discuss them in our feedback call. So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat throughout the conversation because we'll save the chat and do that too. And there's going to be a little survey that we send afterwards. So I don't want you to ever feel like because you didn't think of your question right at that time that it's not going to get asked or answered. We want this to be the beginning of open communication, if that makes sense. So I'm going to start with Andy at the Ballmer Group with her State of the Union. Andy, are you ready? Are you unmuted?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Andy.
No problem at all. And it's so funny, but you know, you're on Zoom calls all the time these days. And right before I got on this, my internet died. And then when I got on, my screen went black. So I was in a dead panic, like 12 minutes ago, but all good now and really good to see all of you. I can only, I think, see 21 at a time, but hello. My name is Andy Smith and I'm the Executive Director of the Ballmer Group in Washington. I've been here for about 2.5 years now, relatively new to philanthropy. I've spent most of my career in working for nonprofits, working for school districts, and then a fair amount of time inside of state government. So like I said, Ballmer Group for 2.5 years, relatively new. So what is Ballmer Group? Ballmer Group is an organization that supports efforts to improve economic mobility for kids and families across the United States who are disproportionately likely to remain in poverty. And so that's our mission statement, and that happens in a few different ways. So Ballmer Group funds nationally. And then we also have a particular focus in 3 geographies. So I'm the Executive Director of Washington State. We also have an office in Los Angeles as well as one in Southeast Michigan, so Detroit area. And then in addition to our regional focus, we also have leads in different national impact areas. So for instance, early learning, we have a particular focus on advocacy, tech and data, as well as place-based partnerships. So one of the ways that we do this work is that we believe that supporting pathways to economic mobility requires a really broad kind of systemic change lens, and that this work is super duper complex, right? So focusing on just one issue area alone is never going to bring the kind of change that we hope to see. So that's why a lot of our philanthropy and our civic engagement is really focused on removing barriers and creating opportunities through all of the different stages of a young person's life. So that means everything from a healthy birth to a good education and a pathway into a career. So you hear like cradle to career, that's what we mean when we say that. Also recognizing that it's not just about education, right? That what happens inside the classroom is incredibly important, but we are also focused on all the stuff that happens outside of the classroom. You know, I think we learned this from the social determinants of health, right? That it's, you know, what the doctor does is great, but whether you have a house, a job, and a friend also impacts your well-being. And so the same is true of the way that Ballmer Group kind of goes about our giving. And then we also have these different ways that we tend to think of how we can influence, and those really fall into the category of community-led initiatives, so like place-based partnerships. We have a focus specifically on partnering with all levels of government. We invest in making nonprofits stronger, and then of course, you know, we use data to track progress and measure improvement. So that's the I guess 3-minute version of what the Ballmer Group does and who we are. Next question, Morgan, was do we have an explicit anti-racist agenda? And then have we experienced shifts from during the uprising? So no, we actually don't have we have not spelled out an anti-racist agenda. I think we have been in a place of recognizing that structural racism is built into all of the systems that govern our lives and does disproportionate harm to Black people and to communities of color. I would say we've made investments to reduce those barriers. So whether that's I don't know, equitable access to early learning or engagement of opportunity youth or pathways to college and career, some of the work we've done in youth homelessness. But what the uprisings have done is helped lift up that there's a difference between that work and creating an explicitly anti-racist agenda. And we are bringing leaders in this work to work with our philanthropy. As we work, we're trying to understand that this is our collective work to do next. This is the thing we need to do next. And you know, with regard to COVID, certainly, I mean, this pandemic that has hit us has been too big to not directly impact our philanthropy. I think that COVID has required us to move faster. I think I've also found that we've relied on some of the same levers that I just mentioned a couple minutes ago that we use in our strategic giving. So we continue to support nonprofits. We continue to try and partner with government. We continue to try and develop relationships with like funding collaboratives, and it's then allowed us to branch out into some areas we don't typically fund. You know, I think food insecurity is one of them. You know, just a quick example there that the governor's office flagged that the 3 largest food NGOs in the state needed a way to quickly collaborate and like basically dump donations into one spot and then push them back out to those organizations so that they could get a statewide reach and do so quickly to help try and feed people. So the role of philanthropy there was, yes, to put in a donation to actually, you know, buy food and support the work, but then also bring other funders in Philanthropy Northwest to the table and pay for the outreach and marketing to spread the word that this is a need to draw in, you know, kind of more leveraged donations. So that's a quick example of how we shifted a bit during COVID-19, and I think I'm at my 5 minutes, so Morgan, I will stop talking. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much, Andy. Next, we're going to hear from Dennis, and then we're going to hear from Kim. Take it away, Dennis. Are you unmuted? Maybe
hey
not.
there. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Morgan. I guess first I'll start by just thanking you all for joining this call. I was really excited to hear the idea for this call. I am just over 1 year in my role at the Raikes Foundation and also 1 year as a resident of the Seattle area. So this is a really nice way to see everybody. Many of you are local. So I appreciate you all joining, and I'm happy to share the things that I know, and I've been here for a year, and I definitely feel like there's a lot to learn, both about the Raikes Foundation, but also about all of you and the great work that's taking place out here in the region and nationally. I came from an organization called the Neighborhood Funders Group, which is a national philanthropic intermediary that focuses on social, economic, and racial justice work across the country. So through that work, I think I have been able to, get a better sense of some of the racial justice work that's taking place nationally. Coming into the Seattle region, I've been just really interested in thinking about where there might be synergies and relationships and connections. So the Raikes Foundation is a family foundation started by Jeff and Tricia Raikes. And the mission of the foundation is to invest in youth-serving institutions and systems to make them more effective in supporting and empowering all people, especially those who have been most marginalized. Our mission, our vision is a just and inclusive society where all young people have the support they need to achieve their full potential. And I'll say that, at the Raikes Foundation, we've been on a learning journey for the past 4 or so years around racial equity and racial justice. And I think more recently, really beginning to understand power and the role that power plays in systems, in communities, and in the social change process. We've got 3 programmatic areas. So the first one is to create an equitable education system. The second area is ending youth and young adult homelessness. And the third area is helping donors shift towards impact-driven philanthropy. And I would say that we absolutely are striving to be an anti-racist organization, both in our internal policies and processes and in our programmatic work. I would also say that it's a journey, and we've been doing some really good work. And, in the context of this past year, I think many organizations, foundations, and nonprofits have all really realized that it's kind of a never-ending process of really exploring the path that you're on, where you are in that path, what it means to lead with racial equity externally in your programmatic work, what it means to evolve your existing work with a race equity lens, and then what it means for you to lead with a race lens internally in your policies and practices. And I think we've got a lot of great work that we're doing, and I think that there's more work we need to figure out. So the next question was, how have we shifted during the COVID-19 last number of months and the uprisings? I'd say the first commitment we made at the start of the pandemic was to our grantee partners. We let them know that their funding was not in jeopardy for the year. We released them from our standard reporting requirements and made it clear that they had, flexibility in how they felt they needed to use the funds to respond to COVID-19. I will say there was a pledge that the Council on Foundations and the Center for Effective Philanthropy launched right at the very beginning of COVID that, honestly, sometimes pledges run a little hollow. This one was great, and I appreciate the work that those 2 national intermediaries played in getting out there early. The pledge was signed by hundreds of foundations. I'm sure there's a range of how seriously people took their commitment, which is normal, I guess. But I feel like we've been really trying to live into that commitment. Other shifts. So when schools started closing kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, this definitely set off alarm bells for our youth and young adult homelessness team. They partnered with Building Changes and started raising funding to support students experiencing homelessness. So in putting together that fund, we emphasized that the funding must be as flexible as possible, and that communities and families could respond to urgent and unexpected needs coming out of COVID-19, whether they were getting access to internet or laptops or securing long-term housing. In response to the racial justice uprisings in the wake of George Floyd's murder, our team created something that we internally have called the Black Leadership and Power Fund. So we set aside about $1 million to go towards Black-led organizing work focused on changing policy, building power, centering anti-racist research, and centering Black leadership. And this was a new experience for us. We, we have not done a lot of response funding. So I think it was both an experiment and an opportunity to sort of build some new muscles, including internally some muscles around collaboration across teams, which, we will be learning from, I think, for the next while. And then just to stay on that point, I mean, I think one of the biggest shifts that we've seen in our team since the start of this year and all the various kind of crises that have unfolded is cross-team and cross-strategy collaboration. And we hope that's something that we can figure out how to design and structure, as we continue to evolve the work at the foundation. I'll say the internal work on, evolving the vehicle of the foundation, it's a lot of work because it's about culture and norms and practices. And you don't necessarily see big impacts from that immediately. And I think these kinds of shifts, particularly collaboration and cross-team strategy, are really required to be responsive in this political moment that we're in, and then really to be supportive of the organizations and the leaders on the ground that we're in partnership with. I'm not sure if that was 5 minutes, but I think I'm done with the questions.
Thank you, Dennis. Are you ready, Kim? Are you unmuted?
I am ready, though I could listen to Dennis talk for the whole time. It's so great to have you in this region, Dennis, and I just really admire your leadership and the work at Neighborhood Funders Group. So just a quick thank you also to the Washington Women's Foundation, Morgan, Aviva, and Maras. Thank you so much for pulling this together. My name is Kim, and I'm the Executive Director of the Stolte Family Foundation. I'm celebrating 3 years with the foundation this week. And prior to that, I was at the Seattle Foundation for just under 10 years working in the donor engagement and philanthropic services team. And that's where I met Chris and Heidi Stolte when they were developing their vision around what was possible in philanthropy. And when I met them, they were very clear that they wanted to return wealth and participate in impactful work. The family uses a donor advised fund, a private foundation, an LLC, and align personal giving to C4 and political action options. And our mission at the foundation is to create a sustainable future where everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential. In pursuit of that mission, we've narrowed in on a commitment to 3 primary pillars: education and early learning, climate and clean energy, and advocacy and civic engagement. I invite you all to go to our website to learn more about those specific strategies, along with our priority outcomes. As a foundation, we're committed to listening and to building relationships. And we come into giving at a time where we're able to benefit from the lessons learned from other funders, along with the growing community voices and leadership who have said that traditional funding and institutional funders are not as impactful as they could be. So we've chosen an approach of making larger grants to a smaller number of partnership. And in doing so, we hope to provide the capacity that organizations need to drive forward community solutions. We also want to be supportive in ways outside of grants. In 2020, we will contribute over 10% of our asset base. We don't believe the IRS 5% minimum required distribution is the most impactful way to give. We believe it's the floor, not the ceiling. And we've increased our giving every year from 2015 onward. And we've done this because we've been present in community, listening to leaders talk about effective strategies and where there are gaps. We are still new on our journey, so we've had that benefit of trying to be nimble and flexible as we've been designing the foundation. We're currently reviewing the distribution of our grants with a racial equity lens. We're partnering with June Wilson, a local consultant who's helping us look at our individual, team, and grant-making opportunities to better use and apply a racial equity framework. We're working towards a commitment to being an anti-racist organization, and we still have work to do. Within our current portfolio of grants, over 22% of grants go to BIPOC-led organizations. The highest percentage of that is within our education portfolio, where over 40% of grants go to BIPOC-led groups. The majority of our intermediary partners also apply a racial equity lens in their work and pass through funding that they supply to organizations. And those are groups like the Washington Progress Alliance and the Rural Democracy Initiative. In terms of our financial assets, we've done the work to minimize the harm that our investments can cause by applying ESG, environmental, social, and governance screens to over 85% of our portfolio. And we're on track to that, reaching 100% of our portfolio within the next year. We're now exploring how our investments can drive forward positive social, environmental, and racial justice outcomes. In fact, I was on a call today with our financial advisors at First Republic, and they shared with us that our interest in expressing our commitment to impact over profit and specifically naming racial justice, positive racial justice outcomes has resulted in one asset manager launching a new racial justice overlay in their portfolio options. We're not the only person that's advocating this, but I share this because I think this is a really important thing for individuals and even foundations with endowments to express. We can go further and talk about not only not causing harm, but causing positive returns. With our investments, we also have private equity investments and a program-related investment supporting clean energy breakthroughs. We expect more PRIs and private equity investments for a larger portion of our strategy and portfolio. In terms of the pandemic and the uprising, we increased our giving significantly, adding $2 million to our payout to respond to the pandemic. We joined local, regional, and statewide efforts in King, Pierce, Snohomish, and Yakima counties. We also looked at our current partners and let them know, as Dennis had mentioned, that we are there. They would be receiving their second year multi-year grants. We inquired what their needs were, and we made additional grants to those groups who are centers of trust for families. We also looked at past partners as well, who are places that families turn to. Most of those were our education partners, but we know that families rely upon those centers of trust for their basic needs supports. We believe in transparency, so we publish our full list of COVID grants on our website in our news section. We also provided some grants to capacity building organizations that nonprofits turn to, like RVC Seattle, Communities Rise, Washington Nonprofits, and Latino Community Fund. We're continuing to explore recovery efforts, including policy efforts addressing a fair and just economic recovery. In terms of the pandemic of violence on Black communities, we also met as a team, really paused to acknowledge the moment and make some grants, fast turnaround grants. And we supported groups like African Community Housing and Development, Black Futures Lab, and the Black Farmers Collective Seattle. We continue to discuss opportunities that align with our advocacy and civic engagement pillar, and we're committing to more action. We will also use our news page to report back on our racial equity commitments. I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Kim. And now, last but definitely not least, and definitely not favorite, because we all love all executive directors equally. Sarah, are you ready?
I'm here. Love it. Thank you. It's good to be here. Again, I'll echo everyone's thank you to not only the people who organized this, but all of you for giving up another couple hours of Zoom in your day. I'm Sarah Wolchek. I'm the executive director of the Satterberg Foundation. I have been in the foundation for just around 7 years. I'm celebrating 3.5 as the executive director. I was the first non-family staff member. The foundation was founded in 1991 and was run for about 23 years with the staff, or with no staff. In that sense, and very much well, it feels like a startup, right? Now I'm the humble leader of a staff of 6, and I work with a board of 9 family members. And so, you know, we've been taking a lot of risks and kind of revisiting our identity, but our mission is to strengthen our communities by promoting a just society and sustainable environment, And then we have a third prong, which is deepening the interconnection of the family. And I think if you look at that mission too, and you think about a family foundation, some of the cool stuff we're even exploring is, what does it look like? What does family even mean? You know, we're looking at like the family foundation. So I think, you know, when we say we want to promote a just society and sustainable environment, as you can imagine, that's like a really broad, vast opportunities to kind of jump in and fund organizations. And I think that was intentional, right? When we're talking about what a just society is, we're talking about things like access to food, housing, education, and employment. And then on the environmental side, we're talking about conservation, resilience, preservation, protection, the whole vision in itself, because no one's leaving single identity lives, is the interconnection of all of that. So like a vision, the grand vision is that the world, you know, would be in balance with people and community. And so we've unpacked that over time. I think we're most known for our core support grant strategy, which is a multi-year general operating grant strategy that the staff and board developed just now 3 years ago. And when we reinvented ourselves, we went back to community to say, hey, where are we needed right now as a foundation that's providing grants? And so I think the foundation of our growth has been in response to community. So the community helped design what was needed, and it should be no surprise to anyone in here that it was multi-year general operating support. And so we're looking at that now, and even 2 years after it, we're trying to be more intentional and clear about what we mean in that. So we're talking, what's the sweet spot of our mission? It could be environmental justice, right? So let's double down on that. We really think that advocacy and civic engagement is core to that. We're funding organizations that are in that. When we started in the diversity, equity, inclusion movement, that was a handful of years ago, let's prioritize organizations that have board and staff that are reflective of that. Multi-issue, let's fund organizations that kind of get that intersectionality, let's fund that. And then most importantly, it's like, are we being responsive to community-led strategies? And I think we're reflecting on our grants now to find out where are the gaps, where are we missing the funding when we have that broad outlook on the world, where we've moved into this. And I would say, no, we don't have an intentional anti-racist agenda. But if you look at where the grants are going and what that is coming to be, our funding might be trending that way. But just like Dennis was talking about, as a leader of a family foundation and a group of organizations working together, we all have to understand what that means, and it needs to have intentionality. What we have is a value of self-reflection and accountability. So like, what could that mean if we push this work further? And then when we look at like the data, it's not lost on us of who the marginalized populations we should be focusing and funding on. And I just want it to be named. Like, how can we actually name that and have it written word, and all of our grants kind of prioritize that first? I think that's where we're moving. Our board and staff moved out of DEI and talking about, you know, trainings and reading books, and we're thinking about like, what does this actually feel like for us to do real racial equity work? And the healing and the intentionality of it is a journey. Like, that is what we've been committed to right now. So with that, you know, the response for COVID is clear for us. What does our community of grant seekers need? Well, we'll respond to that. The flexibility that we keep in our portfolio is for that, because we see the world we're living in as being lively. No one anticipated COVID, but it wasn't lost on my board and staff how quickly it was to respond. What could we do right now? So we got out in front of it. We asked our grantees what they needed. We paid attention to community funds, and we just released those dollars. And so I think what was new for us was maybe the newness was an internal practice, that we have that trust with the board and staff to just be as responsive and kind of meet those needs. And then, you know, what it will continue to look like is being responsive to what those grantees need. Not a lot of them even wanted grant dollars. They said, hold those grant dollars. Can you put some things together for us to heal and feel seen as humans? Some like healing workshops. We've just gotten the business of just constantly being responsive in reaction to what community needs. I think that's the bedrock of our grant making and where this is going. I will say too, I believe what Kim was saying about that total portfolio activation. What does that mean? What parts of our portfolio? It is our investments. We are intentional about it. We started impact investing work 6 years ago. How can we impact the systems all the way through our grants, through every way that our capital is being pushed. So I think I'm living for this accountability of this partnership of talking about family foundations. Like, my intention and goal is to lift that veil of, like, you know, I want the questions. I want to be able to have this as a constant dialogue with community. And so grateful for that. I will add, and I know it's getting to other questions, the racial uprising piece was another pivotal moment for us. And so the staff and board made a strong dollar commitment, but more importantly, we made a 10-year learning commitment. What does that mean? How do we actually get there? Because we can put money out the door, but, like, what are we doing to be accountable and transparent? And so we can talk a little bit more about that later too, and also in the future, but glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And as we are going to open it back up for broader questions, I think something we continue to think about is, like, kind of that both and, like, transparency and accountability and giving money. These things have to happen simultaneously. And I will say, for the Washington Women's Foundation, we were in a different position because we had been building those relationships. So I know other foundations where people weren't answering their phone because they had so much to do. But when Aviva, our grants program manager, called them, they answered because they know she wasn't judging. She wasn't calling to say, take away any money or do anything like that. She was calling just to say, what do you need? So we as funders need to make sure that we are doing the work to where our grantees in our community feel safe saying, hey, this isn't working for me. Hey, are you willing to pivot? Hey, I don't like this report, because it's for y'all. It's for the community. So if it doesn't work for the community, what are we doing? So first question. And again, y'all put a lot of questions, and if you have more questions, put them in the chat. Aviva's gonna put the directions again so y'all can change your name. Let's make it a little bit easier on Aviva to put y'all in breakouts rooms. So please change your name and tell us what breakout room you wanna go into. So our first question is specifically about COVID. And we're gonna ask Andy this question first. The impacts of COVID-19 will be felt well into 2021. Will family foundations continue to have a focus on COVID relief next year? How has COVID-19 changed the way you are funding or plan to fund in 2021 to 2022 and in future in terms of process and priorities? Take it away, Andy, and then we'll go to Kim.
Okay, perfect. And if I start to get windy, Morgan, just please give me some sort of something. And I will cut myself off. But so, yeah, at first, Sarah, Kim, Dennis, really just great to hear you talk about your organizations and the impact of COVID and the uprisings. I just love hearing from you all, and super informative. So just thanks for being so articulate and good at your jobs. Because I think that the way that we've been thinking about COVID at Ballmer is pretty similar to the way that you guys have been thinking about it. You know, first and foremost, we wanted to just ask our grantees, what do you need? And like you, Kim, I think you mentioned it, we, you know, did away or delayed our reporting requirements. We allowed people to change like project-specific grants into general operating support grants. We helped try and connect them to different, you know, big federal programs like PPP, and then provide some technical assistance to help, you know, make sure that those forgivable loans were actually forgivable. So we thought of our role as being flexible and supportive and a connector to other resources that weren't coming from Ballmer. And then I think in terms of our actual giving, like I said in the intro, it gave us a chance to move more quickly. Probably some of you have noticed that sometimes philanthropy doesn't move that fast. And so, you know, being able to get dollars out the door faster, I think was a really good thing for us to be able to do. And then fund outside of our usual lanes. You know, as I had mentioned, we have some specific strategies around cradle to career. But in the time of COVID, we were able to invest in a whole bunch of other things that were just responsive philanthropy. And as Dennis said, that's something that we hadn't done as much of either. So whether it was, you know, food or, you know, prepared meals or eviction prevention or, you know, supplies for childcare, or just even, you know, money to help childcare stay open. PPE. We actually funded some research, just other concrete goods like, you know, laptops, or support for like micro industries like refugee women making masks or something. We just tried to get the money where the money was needed most. And we had some of those relationships, but we didn't have nearly enough. So one of the things that we did was partnered with community foundations or other kind of local pooled funds, to get resources where they were needed. So that meant, like I mentioned in the intro, Washington Food Fund. We were an active supporter of All In Washington to leverage resources. We also invested in like aggregated funds, like the Black Futures Co-op Fund or the Undocumented Workers and Families Fund, for some of those same reasons that, you know, we're super small at Ballmer Group. It's me and 3 portfolio managers on my team. And we don't know all of the people, and we don't know where all of the money needs to go across the state of Washington. So really had a focus on partnering with community foundations and pooled funds who are closer to a broader array of people and can get the money out the door the fastest. So when it comes to 2021, I think it will certainly be a focus of it for us, because, you know, COVID is going to be making its presence known throughout 2021, I think. We're still going to have the economic disruptions, not to mention the public health crisis. So yes, we will continue to focus there. How that plays out, you know, perfectly honest, we don't know yet. We're still laying tracks for our 2021 work. So I can't answer the specifics about how the money will go out the door, or how we will try and interact with current grantees or future grantees. But we will continue to be responsive, and it certainly will continue to be a focus.
Andy shared a lot of the things that I was going to share in terms of leveraging those centers of expertise in communities across the state. I'll just lift up the Yakima Community Foundation right now. It's been wonderful to learn from them and to build off the relationships that they have. So I suspect we will continue to do that. You know, we don't have that clear plan yet. We're going to be moving into planning here fairly soon. We are committed to continuing to listening to our partners and listening to the needs that the aligned or the cohesive, like funder aligned groups come up with. I'd say the one additional thing that we are doing, and we just announced our final phase of COVID grants this year, that we're really around advocacy and civic engagement organizations who are building up the infrastructure to advance the important conversations that will carry forward the message on no austerity measures, on the need for greater revenue. And that's something that we're excited about. So we're helping organizations that are best positioned to build up the ground game, like One America and Fair Work Center, who's really committed on gig workers and undocumented workers. So that's where we've evolved, and that's grants that have been made in 2020, but they're really about like the work that's going to be happening in 2021 and beyond. So I think, you know, the only other thing is that we want to be open to what's possible, and we will be listening to our current partners along with other groups who are giving us a greater awareness of the intersectionality of needs that families are facing. One other thing that a lot of these newer or broader relationships has brought me has put me in a position of redefining what democracy looks like, and that democracy looks more than just a fair and accessible free voting system. It's also about healthcare and housing and criminal justice reform and police accountability. That all of these things are central to creating a just and fair democracy. So this work has brought the great opportunity for us to re-examine how we define our work.
Thank you, Kim. Sarah, we're going to go to you, and then we're going to finish this question with Dennis.
Great. You know, I'll add that, you know, we have a portfolio of 183 grantees that will guide, you know, how we're going to be responsive to their immediate needs. And these are all multi-year grants. So like a lot of things we can do is transactional, moving up payments, all of that. We're going to be flexible to like meet that. But I think like the open door is COVID for us as an organization. It's just, COVID is just the reminder of the deep-rooted inequitable systems and structures in this country. So it's like, how can we step up higher and like work on those. And so I think COVID is the indicator here of like, wow, we have more work to do. So how do we actually start working in that space? And I think that's where, when we're looking at strategy and budgeting and planning, where to focus our work, it's going to be the bigger like vision of like this just society that I don't think in my lifetime, or the liberation of people that I will see, but like how can we kind of build and put more dollars to that? But I think, of course, if our nonprofit partners are struggling and suffering and not being able to keep their doors open, like we're going to be responsive in it. But I think that's that's an addition to like, that's the current environment, we'd be leading in. I think you might see Satterberg invest in the kind of health and healing and the restorative piece. My program director this morning was talking about there's a gap for professional development. So like, how do we actually keep people in these organizations and keep communities healthy? And so I think our COVID stuff is just going to be a responsive. But yeah, for sure. I think it's and both. Not that we would put all money to COVID stuff.
Thank you, Sarah. Dennis?
Yeah, thank you. And just also want to give an appreciation for Andy, Sarah, and Kim. It's really great hearing your thoughts on this stuff. We've all spoken a little bit, but this forum is really useful to just hear from you all, for me as well. I would say internally, COVID has forced us to live into some of the values that we believe in a more tangible way. And I do think that's something that we will continue to carry forward into 2021 and beyond. The things that others have mentioned around really taking a look at the way in which we do our grant making, the flexibility of funding, being clear about reporting requirements, leaning into some of the values around trust-based philanthropy, and centering the voices of those most impacted. These are all things that I think we've believed in for a while, and this moment has really called on us to explore those more deeply. And I think that those explorations are absolutely going to continue and hopefully continue to deepen as we think about the way in which we do our work, which frankly can be as important and sometimes even more important than exactly what you're funding. I would also say programmatically, COVID will play a significant role in shaping our funding next year and probably longer than that. We are all seeing the impact that this crisis and the various other crises that are hitting us this year have had on students in particular and young people, which is a kind of a population of special interest for the Raikes Foundation. So, we're working with our grantee partners in the Bell Network through our education portfolio nationally to curate some of the better resources and to develop new resources and thinking on how to center equity in education amidst the pandemic. On top of that, I think that we will be all bracing for a surge in homelessness, which means an increase in the number of homeless students and youth on the streets. And this will have huge implications, I think, both for the education system as well as other youth serving systems like child welfare, et cetera. And then around 2021, we haven't had sort of the explicit conversations around what 2021 and beyond look like. But I do think it's clear that not only will COVID impact, our thinking for the coming year, but we will be dealing with the impacts of this pandemic, of the economic justice pandemic tied to COVID, the various impacts of racial injustice in this country, and the democracy crisis that we're sitting in. So, this is the world we live in. And when you're trying to resource social change work, I do think you have to be adaptive and really keep all of that in mind and understanding that, the Raikes Foundation can only do so much. So I would say how we lean into partnerships matters a lot. That's with leaders in the world. It's with other people within philanthropy. And then I'd also say, for us, because we're a limited life organization, we are now really starting to explore internally what does it mean to fund in a full spectrum impact sort of a way. So grant making, others on this call have talked about impact investing. I think that's super important for foundations to really grapple with. We are early on that journey, and that'll be something that we continue to sort through and figure out. I think for foundations that have resources that are not just C3 resources, how are you sort of encouraging the growth of C4 and other activities that are tied to mission and purpose are really important. And then for those of us that have a platform of a communications platform, whether it's ourselves, our staff, our trustees, or people in our network, I do think that there's a leadership role and an influence role, both about setting norms, but also about looking for interventions and trying to be a partner beyond funding. So I'll leave it there.
Y'all, I was freaking out about time, and then I remembered this is just the beginning. I don't have to fit all of the questions into one meeting, you know what I mean? So, but I do want to get to this juicy question before we go into breakout rooms, because we think it's really important that y'all have the time to individually talk to people. So please don't forget to move your name around. But so, does your foundation have any plans to expand their giving beyond the 5%? Have you considered spending down? How do you view reparations or returning resources? And we'll start with Dennis and then go to Sarah.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. We are already giving well above the 5%. I just mentioned moments ago that we are a limited life organization. So, we are careening towards a 2038 end of grant making strategy. And I'll say, working within a foundation that has a timeline is like incredibly liberating. I do love that. And I love that Jeff and Tricia, plus the staff and all the other folks that were involved with those conversations, made that commitment a year or two ago. What it does is it really does decouple the resourcing of the work a little bit from the sort of the struggle around protection of the endowment and the assets. And it has allowed us to be, I think, a lot more flexible over the last few years in how we've ramped up our grant making, which is great. The trustees definitely, and I'd say the staff and as well, live by a belief, which is do as much as possible as soon as you can. We're in a crazy time right now, and whatever you care about, it's kind of on the line. Because our society faces such extremely urgent challenges right now, I think for Jeff and Tricia, choosing to sunset the foundation now was an acknowledgement that they'd rather those resources come to bear now, and that for future generations and in future eras, there will be hopefully different challenges. Hopefully it won't be still the same challenges, although we'll see, maybe it's the same challenges with a different nuance. On the question of reparations and returning resources, we have had some conversations about reparations, but more in the context of government's responsibility and not in the context of the foundation itself. I think these are newer, early stage conversations. I do think, in the wake of the renewed energy and commitments around racial justice in this country, the conversation on reparations has moved from what for a long time was a fringe conversation much more into sort of the center of the debate. I think, and that's an acknowledgement of the structural racism that's been a part of this country since its beginning. And there's new sort of writing and some articulation of this that's kind of hit the popular media that I think is beginning to catch. So it's a conversation that, as others who are in it, I would just be curious in hearing what you're hearing. But we haven't dug beyond that in our own Foundation Explicit conversations.
Thank you, Dennis. We're going to go Sarah and then Kim.
Okay, yeah, the payout, this is always like a really grounding conversation. When I walked into the foundation, the family was already committed to a 10% minimum payout, and it stems a lot from what Dennis is speaking of like this lifetime, there's abundance here. We have this big vision of seeing social change happen. Like, it's not going to help by incrementally giving $5,000 grants. And so I think the family was already there. And I think like the newness of the 10% being obviously the floor, not the ceiling, has always been real. I think COVID, I think the racial uprising really pushed the family to like kind of be accountable to that. That's what that means, to like, what is the floor? How do you get past that? I think a little bit on like what Dennis is saying, my conversations with the family now are, there's a lot of power and intentionality about setting that sunset date, letting that guide how our grants are going to be made and these resources going and how it's all going to kind of play out, as rather than, we all know how to do math. If we give at a higher rate than our return, we're going to go away at some point. And so I think the beauty in it now is taking ownership of that and really making some big plays. And so I think that's the conversation we're going into our kind of next strategic plan with that. I actually was bouncing off this reparations conversation, the like grant making, like every year I feel like there's a new, even how we refer to grantees. And so it's like, I think this is an evolving, what does this look like? But it starts with like acknowledgement of like, whose money is this? And I think the family has been on that. And I think the literature that Dennis is talking about, so much writing. We all know how foundations were created, the tax shelters, this money is still under control and power of a board. Although it's in another place, there's still someone controlling it. So it's like, how can we talk about those types of things? I was talking to Cece about this idea of reparations. We could go with it. The board's going to trust it. But this 10-year sort of commitment that we're going to have about learning is so that my board is using reparations conversations, so they have the knowledge to even understand why we would be saying that. So that's the goal. I think we can say it and we're doing it, but it's like, I really want, again, like, this is a family foundation. We have to be in consensus and collaboration, and what a beautiful opportunity to help people have that awareness and understanding of why reparations, why would we be saying that, is kind of where I'm working on it right now.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Kim, and then Andy.
Great. I too think there's so much value in the conversation of reparations, and we're early in that journey, and we know that there's multiple ways that we can take future action to demonstrate a return and a giving back. It's not just in the funding of the vehicle, but it's also in the who makes the decisions moving forward. So we too have been having conversations. We collectively, our staff and co-founders, read The Color of Money, Black Banks and the Racial Wealth Gap. I think, after those discussions, we were all in agreement that reparations are warranted. And there's the opportunity to frame and support government action, but also to take more action in our own lives, whether that's our own personal giving or the way we approach more giving in the foundation. We too don't use that 5%. I think we're at a place where talking about the impact that we could have will lead us to a potential spend down. We haven't committed to that yet, but we're funding in climate and clean energy, and we know deep investments now are needed. It's a place that we've been exploring additional impact outside of Washington and Oregon, just thinking through the timeliness of this. Again, the family's using non-foundation levers to be able to have some influence in moving that critical, timely issue forward. And education equity, we can't wait either. Like, it's critical now that we bring equity inside of our schools and that we deliver on that. So yes, we are supportive of reparations and in the beginning of conversations of what that can look like inside of the foundation. And then as individual actors in other parts of our lives, thinking through how we can be advocates for government reparations programs. And we're discussing spend down, but there has not been, we're early on in those conversations. We only have 2 board members, trustees. We like to say co-founders, Chris and Heidi, and they have young kids. So they are pretty committed to staying open, but are not aligned to perpetuity in any way.
Thank you so much, Kim. And you know what? And as Andy goes, I want to say the first time I heard someone say returning resources instead of reparations, I was like, oh, yeah, let's call it that. I like that one. And so after Andy goes, we're going to put y'all in breakouts. And if you're still here in this room, you're just going to be talking to me and my CEO, Beth, at the Washington Women's Foundation. So you should really go to, and she's like, Morgan, you didn't tell me I was going to have to talk to people. So you should really pick a breakout so Beth doesn't have to talk to people. Go ahead, Andy.
Thanks, Morgan. So spend down plans. We're actually not a foundation. We are structured legally as an LLC, so we're not subject to the same % giving requirements as my colleagues. We operate through a donor-advised fund. And, you know, these conversations are really new. And, you know, we were founded about 4 years ago. We really got going in about 2017. I think that we've given about $1.4 billion out to date and keep increasing year over year. We don't have a spend down timeline, but, you know, we do have the flexibility to give how much is needed. And I think that both, you know, like Kim, we have 2 trustees, Connie and Steve Ballmer. And I just saw that chat and that cracked me up. And it threw me off my game. What was I just going to say? So we have some flexibility to be responsive, and both of our trustees, Connie and Steve, are committed to showing up for as long as we can, and there's need. You know, with regard to returning resources, I'd say that we want to show up as a philanthropy in a way that is supportive. We don't want to be the philanthropy that lands in a community and then has an agenda that we're going to fund and run. We want to give resources to support people in building what works in their infrastructure and the values in their community. So I would say that for Ballmer Group, the conversation is about supporting communities to self-determine, if that makes sense. You know, we've been thinking about systems change quite a bit. And so part of that is funding more organizations who have power on the ground to advocate for themselves. One of the cool things about not being a foundation is that we can literally give advocacy money, like C4 dollars, to advocates to press elected officials or press the general public to change laws that they don't like or they don't want. So yes, we have an approach on the programmatic side, you know, support the development of, you know, pipeline for Black and brown teachers, or to support equitable or expanded access to early learning. But we also get that this is about power and about self-determination and about being able to, you know, support and empower communities in a way that we see as empowering economic mobility. So we see the need for this as long and deep, and though we don't have, you know, a timeline, we haven't discussed it internally, we are certainly there for the long haul.
Thank you, Andy. And someone private messaged me how to rename yourself. I can't even find you to reply. So just private message Aviva where you want to go and she'll go. So now we're about to go to breakouts. And guys, I have the most fabulous last question. So at the end of your breakouts, don't just leave. Come back to hear the last question. We might go a few minutes early or over, but I promise it'll be worth it. So Aviva's going to put us in breakouts. Don't forget, you're going to get a message from us that says, hey, it's been 7.5 minutes. If you want to switch breakouts, I cut it down from 10. See, I'm trying to save time. So that's what we'll do. And everyone enjoy your breakout. And if you're still here, you have to click your, join. And if you didn't tell us where you want to go, tell us where you want to go so that we can put you there. But everyone seems to be going. Don't forget to accept whichever breakout you want to go in. And if you have to run off, thank you for joining even a little bit. You'll get the survey, and we hope to hear from you soon. Lindsay, you're not going anywhere, right? Or are you going somewhere? You don't know. Lindsay doesn't know what she's going to do. So she can.
I never know. I never know what I'm doing. Okay. I have 2, but yeah.
Got it, got it. So everyone is just clicking their breakout. Don't forget to click your breakout. All right, welcome back. We're glad you stayed. It was a good conversation. I hope y'all were having good conversations. Remember, if you're getting nervous, you're feeling like you could have talked for hours, remember, this is the beginning. This isn't going to be one. So you'll have more opportunities to talk. We'll give it a second to make sure that everyone comes back, and then I'll ask our last question. How'd it go?
That went fast, and I do feel like our room could have spent more time together, and really appreciated hearing from people. So thank you, Ballmer Group.
Yeah, I know. It was like,
it was quick.
That's the thing. These things go so quick, so quick. And that's why I have to keep reminding myself every time. I'm like, man, we're running out of time. We're running out of time. This is just our first time together, y'all. We're going to do another one of these. It might look a little different. We're going to learn from how this went. Maybe we'll do a full 2 hours instead of 90 minutes. Best quote from Cece, not surprised, y'all. This is what I'm telling y'all. Cece is it. We just all bow down to Cece. We just all bow down to Cece, okay? We know what philanthropy is. It's tax shelters with some charity on the side. Woo, Cece, that is a good quote. Man, we'll do another one of these where it's just us listening to things Cece has said. Well, I'm glad y'all all came back. We're going to have one final question. And like I said, there's going to be a survey where you can put your input. And part of the survey is like, it's all open-ended. So you can tell us, like, what does next look like? What should we do next? Is this helpful? Should it be 2 hours? I mean, you really can't go over 2 hours in Zoom, but should it be a series? We could do one full session on COVID. Like, the world is our oyster. So our last question, okay, do we want to talk about equity or do we want to talk about grantees? Let's go equity with a little bit of grantees on the side. So how are you thinking about incorporating an equity lens, specifically racial equity, into your decision-making guidelines, addressing inequities in your own organizations, including foundations, family members, and board members? That is a big question. And so we're going to start with Sarah. Sorry, Sarah.
Should I just let Cece go? Because I'm here for it. Let me see. Let's see. How are we incorporating this? I think, the light lens of that diversity, equity, inclusion, of what that meant to the foundation about prioritizing BIPOC and community-led work is built in. But for us, it's like, what are you going to do more? What is beyond that? Because even in a breakout group we have, it's like, these are still metrics. How are we deciding? And honestly, what's a racial equity lens, right? Like, that's the kind of stuff that, we're trying to get away from. Like, we're still creating process. There's still a decision of like what that is. So like, how do we break out of that? And so I think, in August at our board meeting, there's like all this fire. The murder of George Floyd, hundreds of Black people, is definitely a wake-up call for some people on my board. Okay, well, we got to do something. And so, of course, that initial reaction is, we got to put some money somewhere, because that's the power we have, that's a platform we have. So let's write some checks. And then on top of it, it became a very intentional thing. Like, how are we going to build this in our practices? Who is doing this work together? And so we've committed $50 million to Black and Indigenous-led work over the next 10 years. Okay, so that is grants, but that's also like our own work. What does that mean for us as an organization? That how is it that our policies, what is the racial equity lens on our policies, our vendors, who we're hiring? There's some amazing nonprofits out here that have racial grievance policies in their practices. Like, I want us to get to a place to where it's just who we are, that it's the culture of it. I think this extra dollars on top of our core support grants to do this level of grant making is the future. Then all of our grant making will just be that. And then we can sunset away because we'll change the world. Like, maybe that is really where this is going. But again, like, get out of the racial equity lens, like just move the money. We already know, like we all have solutions. We know what the need is. It's not working. It hasn't been working. So like, let's just try something else.
Thank you, Sarah. And we're gonna move on to Andy, and then we're gonna go to Dennis.
Sarah, I really appreciate the way that you talk about these things, and I don't want to follow you. But so Ballmer Group, a couple of things. We have a mission on economic mobility, and we know that BIPOC communities have been disproportionately harmed given the prevalence of systemic racism in education, housing, workforce, criminal justice, policing, other public systems. A core part of our work is that we support incredible organizations and outstanding individuals in the fight against that inequity and injustice. And we plan to do much more of that. These organizations are advocating to change the structural racism that we all know pervades our society, in addition to providing services to communities. And I think one of the ads of Ballmer and other folks at this table is that we can fund advocacy, so we can fund community organizing to fight things like voter suppression, or to support things like an accurate count on the census, and we are actively engaged in funding there. But we also realize that one of the issues that we have is that we're white-led and we're white-run. So if we're going to improve, if we're going to do better, if we're going to do different, then we need to we need to be different. We need to change the way that we're rolling internally. So we're doing that. We've talked about a learning journey, which I know is not a great thing to hear from philanthropy, but that is where the Ballmer Group is right now. We're actively trying to hire for DEI work to lead Ballmer Group through a process to identify the changes that we need in our organization. We've changed up our learning process, trying to bring in people who are with different perspectives, so we're not just talking to ourselves. As Sarah said, we're thinking about our processes. We're examining our rules around funding and the way that we assess grantees, and whether those processes perpetuate the practice of underfunding BIPOC-led organizations. And we know that we've got work to do inside Ballmer Group, for sure. And we know that internal incentives impact how we show up externally. You probably all saw the article in the Seattle Times on Starbucks yesterday and their executive compensation. But what I would say is that how we show up externally is what's at issue. We could be a perfectly anti-racist organization, if we didn't give away any money, like, who cares, right? So we have to show up externally. And what's really at stake is how well we support the organizations and amazing people in the fight against inequity and injustice. So we know that starts with us, but we know our larger work is external support.
Great. Dennis, and then Kim.
Thanks, Morgan. So we've been on a journey as an organization, and also the individuals within it, including Jeff and Tricia, for years, and with the intent of centering our strategies on racial equity and making our organization an equitable and an inclusive place to work. There's more work that we can do. And I'm really, I've been here for a year, and part of my intent over this past year is to really just, with open eyes, kind of get a sense of where we're strong and where we've got room to grow. I mentioned earlier, I think that this work isn't like check it off and you're done. I think even for individuals who are not white, who do this work, there's work for all of us to do. There's work for our white colleagues to do, and there's work for us to do as an organization. And that's, internally as an employer, and that's externally as a grant maker and an influencer. And I'm hearing similar comments from my other colleagues on the panel. I would very much agree with that. We've done some great work. Like, I have been impressed, I'll be honest. We've evolved our grant making strategies, and that is still underway. from what they were a few years ago to where they are now and where we hope they go, so that they take a much stronger perspective about who's centered and what strategies are we resourcing to get there, and our role as a grant maker. I've been really pleased, frankly, to see just sort of where some of the evolutions have, where we've been and where we're going. And I do think that there's totally work that we still need to do. I think for us, one of our learning edges is figuring out how we understand the social change process. How does our grant making understand how change happens now? That is evolving quickly. I mean, movements are alive like they have not been in my lifetime. And this has been growing for 15 years, but in particular, I think since Ferguson. And so, you know, all of our assumptions on how change happens, and all of the conventions I think that we've all known about how change happens, they're a little bit in free fall, and some of those things are going to change radically. So taking stock of that and being able to adapt to that, I think is a goal for us as an organization, for sure. And you know, like I've said, I feel like we've done some great work to get to where we are, and now it's time to, you know, get back on the mountain and climb up to our next peak or plateau, because we're not done, and hopefully we won't ever be done. The last thing I'll say is, you know, we have you know, a set of intellectual frameworks, including our vision and mission and all the things. We're going to take some look at that, and really where I think we'll land is to lift up racial equity in a much bigger way in those intellectual frameworks. It's been a part of our practice, but we haven't yet fully evolved, you know, what's on paper and what's on the website to reflect that. So we'll be doing some of that work over the next few months. Yeah, so I'll leave it there.
Go ahead and finish, Kim.
Thank you. I think I shared a little bit early on in the state of our foundation, how we're partnering right now with a racial equity consultant, and she's in the process of doing assessments on where there's opportunity for individual growth, for team growth, and stretch, and then for our grant making. We've done a good job with our education portfolio, really thoughtfully applying a racial equity lens to that work from the very beginning. And the outcome of that was a cohort of 9 organizations led by women of color. It also, one of the outcomes was funding the United Way for their participatory grant making effort with a cohort of parent-child plus organizations. And the report that they've developed, and hearing the lessons learned and the power of stepping out and letting leaders choose where resources go, is something that we're really reflecting on. That was a great, sorry, I've got some dings happening. That was a great experience for us. And I think we need to do a good job of applying the way we've approached that work with the other pillars in the foundation. I was recently reviewing our advocacy and civic engagement landscape scan that we did last year. In the last 2 months, I've applied intentionally a Black-led and Native-led and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander-led lens. And I found a whole bunch of organizations that did not come through the first time that I did this work. And the power of that experience was, when you think you're applying an equity lens, you come up with great groups and you think you're seeing a full picture. But unless you apply a really specific lens, like a Black-led organizing lens or a Native-led organizing lens, you'll miss groups. And we're discussing that right now. Put those groups in blue. So it's very powerful when we're looking at the map of, even with intentionally using an equity lens, we missed so much. So we have work to do. We're doing internal work. It will result in new partnerships within our pillars. And we're excited about this work. Could talk so much more about it, but I think I'm reflecting on something I heard last week from a panelist at the Philanthropy Northwest conference, again, of like, fund us like you want us to win. We need to use the resources that we have on the table in other pockets to be able to really invest deeply in this work and do the transformational individual work. to learn important lessons and then to activate our networks in support of a more just and fair community.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I would just say thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you for being here. And I want to let you know that at the Washington Women's Foundation, we listen. This all started because Roxana at One America asked me if I would do a panel of our donors talking about how their funding had changed. And then and then it grew and it grew and it grew and it grew. So I hope that you heard today that we want your feedback. All of us, all of the 5 organizations, including the Washington Women's Foundation, recognize that we are here to work for you all. So please tell us what we can do to make this experience better for you. We thank you so much for coming today. I'll let you know if you go to the Washington Women's Foundation's website, I do 75 events a year, and most of those are free and open to the public. So please use us as a resource. If there's a training you want that you think would be helpful for other community members and I haven't thought of it yet, let me know and we'll do it. I mean, I don't know how else to say that. And we have the privilege of partnering with these other organizations to make that happen. And so we hope you'll take the time to fill out the survey. I'll let you know that next week we're doing something on capacity building, or the week after next, Aviva. Correct me if I'm wrong. We have something coming up where we're talking to Washington State undocumented relief funds. And then in November, we are bringing Austin Channing Brown and some amazing other Black women to Seattle Zoom to talk to y'all. So please check out Intersect. Please check our websites. And please fill out that survey so we can know if we're doing okay or if we can do better. I think we can always do better. But yeah, this is all for you. So if it's not working, let us know. And thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to us.
Morgan, thank you for killing it on the facilitation and for bringing it together. Thank you.
No
yes,
problem.
Thank you, Morgan.
Thanks, Morgan.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Y'all have a good day.
Sarah,
Thank
Sarah,
you.
hop off
Bye. Say bye.
Bye.
Here.
Oh, I should have taken.
Take it now before everyone leaves you.
Oh yeah, it's not. Here's the thing, Sarah. We don't know how to screenshot, so Aviva has to bring up her
I'll
phone.
take a pic. Oh, it's too late.
Wait, you know how to screenshot? What do you mean?
I'm not.
Mars, don't judge us, okay?
I'm sorry. I take away the judgment.
You have
It's
a Mac or a
dumbest
PC,
question.
Aviva?
Tell me
Is it a
more.
Mac? Is it a Mac or a PC that you're
It's a
using?
PC, but I grew up on Mac, so I'm like, it's like I don't know.
Isn't there like a button specifically for screenshotting on a PC keyboard?
Yeah, it's like a print screen or something. Can't you?
Yeah.
Where
is
is
it? Print
It's
screen.
the Windows
What that
logo, Shift, and S. The
Oh,
little
like
Windows
not
logo.
in Zoom, like just in Windows?
Oh,
Oh, damn, George. Thank you.
So much learning is happening today.
thank you, George.
Yeah.
First development job was the database manager.
Love it.
That's awesome. Thank you.
So I know how to work a keyboard. That's about it.
I'm going to keep that. That's great. Thank you. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks for coming. I think the
Thank
next
you.
panel is just going to be Cece.
Well, she's
I'm
It would
still
have the
trying to figure
highest
out.
attendance of any